guys, and welcome to Betwixt the Books. Today we have an ARC review for you. The book itself will have come out last week because of the timing of our releases for Betwixt content, but we did read it before the release date, we promise. It is part of our 2022 reading challenge. If you didn't know, we have a buddy reading challenge that we do. You can go see it on Storygraph if you want to join us or see some of the books that we may possibly review later in the year. But it is a bonus challenge, which is a book that is outside of Gretchen's comfort zone. Today we are going to be talking about this very great horror novella, What Moves the Dead by T. Kingfisher.
Yay! Horror! Thanks, Michaela! We're going to talk more about this later, where I actually have to tell you that I enjoyed this book, but before we get into all of that, we are talking today about this horror novella that surprisingly has a lot packed into, I think what's about like 160 pages or so. So this is a retelling of the House of Usher. How much of a retelling we'll also get into later. But for the purposes of this plot, we follow a formerly sworn soldier, Alex, who goes to the House of Usher, where two of their childhood friends, Roderick and his sister, are dying, basically. The house is crumbling around them. They both have some kind of bizarre disease that is also driving them a little bit mad. There are some other characters. Roderick has, for example, called in an American doctor named Denton. There is the wonderful Miss Potter, who is a female English woman who desperately wants to be an official mushroom scientist, but of course she's a woman, that doesn't happen. And there are a couple of other characters that come up along the way, but essentially the book is about trying to save the life of the siblings and figure out what in the heck is happening, because it becomes clear very quickly that this is not a regular disease, and in fact there are some very inexplicable, creepy things happening, and it's gonna get creepier.
We mentioned it briefly, but obviously I'm much more of a horror reader than Gretchen is, and by that I mean I read horror and Gretchen doesn't unless I make her read one. So I was pre-inclined to enjoy this. Obviously it's more up my alley than it is hers. I did wind up really loving it. I think I'm gonna rate it 4.5, maybe 4.75 stars. It's not like mind-blowing and one of my favorite books of all time, but it was perfectly serviceable, really enjoyable. If you just want a quick little horror book, it's definitely something to pick up. I'm gonna highly recommend that you grab the hardcover because I wasn't aware of it, but look at these end papers. This is beautiful, and if you're wondering why I have a physical copy, it's because the ARC copy that I had, the font size on it was so tiny that I had to go out and get a physical one, and I'm not even mad about it because this is beautiful. I love it. I probably would have bought a copy anyway because I liked it enough, but it was fully worth it. Grab a hardcover, please do. What I'm going to say for my overall spoiler-free review of this was if you like gothic horror, this is definitely going to be something to pick up. If you like some body horror stuff too, this might be worthwhile of picking up. The two books that we kind of felt like it really resonated with was Mexican Gothic by Sylvia Moreno Garcia and Annihilation by Jeff Vandermeer. If you've read either of these and enjoyed them, pick up this one because you're definitely going to like it as well. If you like retellings, if you like Poe, if you haven't read Edgar Allan Poe in a long time, this really brought up those feelings that I remember really enjoying Edgar Allan Poe as a younger person, and it lived up to that plus a little bit extra because there's some queer representation and a little bit more body horror than would ever have showed up in Poe. Poe doesn't do body horror. It's just that encompassing sad creepiness, which is definitely here as well.
So like Michaela said, I don't do horror. I actively avoid horror. I do not want to read horror. And then Michaela says, well, it would make me so happy if we read a horror book. And I'm like, oh, but I love you. And then I read horror. And I have to say, in terms of the things she could have picked for this bonus challenge, I really enjoyed this. I did not end up rating it as highly as her. I think I've settled around 3.5, 3.75 stars, and that's less about the bulk of the book and more just I rate really harshly if I think the ending doesn't live up to the rest of the book. So we'll talk about that in a very spoiler-free fashion later on. But what I really loved about this book is, so I was starting to read it and I was just like waiting, right? Just like, it's gonna be spooky. And there was really great banter with the characters. There was actually really great humor. And it was just like 50% of it really is just like, things aren't right and they're getting progressively more but it like then gets spooky after that, and it just feels very satisfying. It feels very fun. Michaela mentioned it very briefly, but there's queer rep in here, and also there's like a lot more world building that I would have expected in something that is 160 pages. We're gonna talk about all this later, but I just think as a package, I was very impressed. I've not read a T. Kingfisher before. I really enjoyed the writing style. But I'm sad about the way that it ended. And that's most of my rating that went down, to be honest. So more on that later.
So I have already read Fall of the House of Usher, which is the story that this book is based on. I will give the caveat that I read it in 7th grade, so it has been a while. But I am going to say, as far as retellings go, this is very much a beat-for-beat retelling. It is the almost exact same plot of the entire thing with things added to it. So if you're expecting the ending to be different, it's not that kind of retelling. It is not one where they're taking, T. Kingfisher is taking huge liberties with what is going on. It is mostly just adding in an actual explanation for the weirdness of that story that didn't exist in the original story, because if I am remembering correctly, the madness element was there, but we did not know what was causing the madness, and that was kind of the point of it, was that it was this like weird thing, this weird experience this character has by coming into this house and seeing these people that they knew from friendship completely falling apart, and then some like crazy creepy stuff happens and they just kind of walk away at the end, and we get a better explanation of what is going on here and like what could cause that sort of madness. And part of that might be because, you know, we live in 2022 and there is a lot more scientific advances that have been made since the time that Poe was writing his original story, and there could be an explanation for what is going on. But if you are looking for like a completely different retake, that's not what this is. This is very it's very true to the source material. So if you are a fan of Poe's, it feels very Poe-esque. It definitely has that in there.
So I am going to let Michaela talk about Alex, our protagonist, because I want to talk about the horse. Okay? And you're like, what are you talking about? And I'm actually going to talk about all the side characters, but I feel like one of the best ways to describe how excellent the side characters are in this novel is to tell you that Michaela and I friggin' loved Alex's horse, Hob. Like, even Alex's horse has a personality, and I have definitely made that complaint before when we've read novellas where I'm like, you know, maybe one or two of the characters gets, you know, really good character building, or they're really focused on maybe just a couple of characters, and I often complain about that, and I'm like, oh, I don't like that. But in this story, again, we'll talk more about Alex later, but even the side characters, the horse, Denton, the American, he's technically a doctor, but he talks about having basically been in school to become a doctor, and then the Civil War in America started, and he got shoved out the door and had to do like all of these like amputations with a bone saw, and so he's definitely seen some stuff. Should mention just briefly that this book takes place in like alternate worlds, so it's a world very similar to ours, but there's some different stuff. But like things like that have happened. Miss Potter, the English woman who, you know, is just really angry that men won't let her be a legit mushroom scientist running around. That's really great. And then of course the siblings have spent a lot of time on screen. But in particular, I felt like these these side characters that you wouldn't expect to be important, like you would expect Alex and the siblings to be important, including the horse, still really got great characterization. And that's just, to me, the mark of a really, really good writer. And I really enjoyed that.
Obviously, we can't talk about this without talking about Alex, and you may have picked up on the fact that we have been using they, them pronouns for Alex, and that is because Alex is very clearly non-binary. Now, in the world of the story, Alex uses ka/con pronouns, and this is because they are from a country that doesn't actually exist, and in that country's language, they have, like, I think Alex has, like, 11 different sets of pronouns. Children all use the same gender-neutral set of pronouns, Vaughn, when they are growing up, so they don't get gendered terms until they are an adult. And then there are the equivalent of he, him, and she, her. But Alex did not feel like a woman, which would have been what they would have been defined as had they been in Britain growing up. And one of the ways in their country that you can change your pronouns legitimately, legally, is to just sign up to be a soldier, because all soldiers get the pronouns ka/con, and any soldier would be referred to that, whether they are male or female. And because of just a piece of oversight and the need for more soldiers in their country, women were able to enlist and thus get those pronouns. So yes, Alex is non-binary, and obviously, like, all of the stuff that I just said to you, again, this story is like 150 pages long, and I just told you like a bunch of history about a country, and it didn't feel info-dumpy at all when we got it. It was just more of a description about why Alex is the way that Alex is, and it gave us a little bit more about the country, and it was like really fun to read about this like different way of growing up with different pronouns and different views on gender and identity. There is also discussions that are brought up when characters who obviously are not from this country interact with Alex the first time. They know that Alex is from that country, but obviously they are speaking English, because most of these are English speakers, and I believe that it takes place in England itself, although it wasn't explained fully, so it may not have been. Like, nobody named the location that they were in, but there's people described as English women, and there's a character with a Scottish brogue, so like it is somewhere in Europe at least. They don't know what pronouns to use when they interact with Alex for the first time, and until they see that Alex is a soldier, and then they just refer to Alex as lieutenant or soldier or sir, if they are unsure of which pronouns to do. And there's descriptions of that, so it's definitely not like the entire world uses gender neutral pronouns. They still don't know what to use for Alex when they first interact with them. So if you are non-binary, it like felt true to that experience as well.
This is really random, but Alex also has tinnitus, which is something I don't think I've ever actually seen used in a plot before, which is something that I have. And it's very jarring. It's known as like that ringing in your ears sensation. And when it happens, if it happens badly, if you have it, like I have to stop, like my balance is a little bit off. And that's like a major part of Alex's character as well. And I'm like texting Michaela, like, I am learning so much about tinnitus and mushrooms. This was not on my bingo card for this book. So, love that. Anyway, I want to talk about two structural things with this book, and one of them is not actually a problem, and one of them I've already discussed is, and I'm going to try to keep this as spoiler-free as possible. But I want to tell you something funny, which is that I was reading this earlier than Michaela was, and so I'm like texting her while I'm doing this, but I'm trying to be very, very vague. And I was like, oh, this book is really giving me name redacted vibes. And she was like, really? But also I got very proud of myself, and I was like, oh my God, I think I know what is causing all of the creepy stuff to happen. And I was so proud of myself, and I was like, oh, I think this is gonna happen. I think this is it. And Michaela, who had not yet started it, was like, is it this? And I was like, how did you know? I didn't say that to her at the time, but she was like, yeah, if you look in the right places, it's pretty obvious. And I was like, huh? So I actually don't know if the twist in this book necessarily is meant to be a twist. And we discussed this when she had finished it, and kind of came to the conclusion that it actually doesn't matter whether or not you guess from the beginning or not, because with the book setting up such a slow, creeping feeling of unease, it doesn't change how creepy the finale moment is, whether you've guessed it or not. Because the way that T. Kingfisher writes that and the images that it's just creepy. So I kind of just feel silly that I didn't notice what she noticed, but that's fine. We were reading, I'm not going to go into it, but don't worry about that. If you're me or you're her, you should enjoy this. However, and I can't believe I'm saying this, because 9 times out of 10, I will tell you I want less spooky and I want a resolved ending, especially in a novella. In this book, I wanted more spooky at the end and I wanted a less resolved ending. I felt like this book could have ended earlier. And yes, I'm asking for a shorter book here, which I never do. I felt like the ending going on the way it did was a little bit of a letdown, and that is why I rated it slightly lower. It doesn't necessarily mean you will have that same reaction. Michaela did not, but I was like, I want more spooky, and Michaela was like, are you okay? And to me, I think that's just a mark of the fact that this is a good book. And I wanted to be left on a more uneasy footing than the book really left us on. So do with that what you will.
Gretchen normally does the end of these where she like wraps everything up really nicely, but since she had the last word on the review, I'm going to try and do it. So if it is not as clean as hers normally is, apologies. I'm doing my best. It's normally her job for a reason. I'm a little all over the place, but we have come together and planned out more or less everything that we are doing for the rest of the year. And part of that is because of our buddy reading challenge. So again, go check that out if you haven't already. We know some things that we're going to be doing, including nonfiction, including queer romance reviews. There's going to be a whole bunch of different stuff coming for the next half of the year. So look forward to that for sure. Every 2 weeks, you see us on Friday where we do something. If you want another queer book review, I recommend checking out what I did last week, I think, based on when this video is coming out, where I reviewed a new queer romance book. If you want more horror recommendations, I can also point to some videos where I talk about those, including I think one where I talk about Mexican Gothic, which I compared to this one. And if you want something completely different, you hate horror, I don't know why you've watched this far into this video, but you can go watch Gretchen's content where she talks about romances or nonfiction. You know, we are all over the place. We read a lot of things. I hope that you enjoyed this one, and we will be back again soon with something new, and talk to you later.